Hello and welcome to Radio Writeoff. My name's Crawl Scratch.
And I'm not a hat.
And it has been far too long since I've said those words.
It really has. This is the first Radio Write-Off we've done this year, right? I thought it was, but...
It is, and we are halfway through February, which just goes to show we are slackers.
No, I mean, I think, the end of January and the beginning of February, I just need to, write that time off in, my getting anything ever done ever time. My years are just 11 months long now as far as getting things done, because screw winter and screw anyways. Yeah, right. So first write-off of the year, we have a excellent prompt that drew in a lot of people, and we also have new features on the write-off site.
Yeah, notifications have only just been released, as it literally hours before we're recording this.
Literally hours.
You've had a chance to test those, haven't you? Because you've had responses to your posts.
Yeah, I actually posted on an alt, and had my alt reply to my main thing, and Andrew Rogue graciously replied to both of those posts for me. So you can't notify your own alts, but but if people reply to an alt and reply to your main account, the notifications will both go to the same place. So most likely it's just there's probably no difference between alts and mains account. Yeah. So but it is maybe worth knowing that if someone replies to an alt and you know it comes to the notification with your main account, just if you're going to reply as your alt, be sure to switch back to your alt before you reply. Otherwise it'll be really obvious that it's you, not your alt. So.
And obviously this is a huge blow to all those people who wanted to have long, detailed conversations with their alts about anything.
Horizon and Skywriter, as they seem to do.
I know I was greatly looking forward to having a good conversation with my gothic self.
Oh, yes.
But, alas, it is not meant to be.
Oh, well.
But still, it's good to have a notification system at last. It is good to have a
notifications are great.
To know when people comment on your stories as well as when people reply to you. That's actually going to be really, really useful, I think. Because I know, goodness knows how long I've spent, when I enter a write-off, how long I spend scrolling through the discussion thread looking for comments on my own story because I can't be bothered to go to my own stories link.
Yeah, well, and Roger mentioned that in the future we may even have mentioned things too, so you could put in at Quill Scratch without specifically doing a reply, and it would notify Quill Scratch without having to find one of his posts and click the reply button. But that's apparently
finding
a little
my
more...
posts is very difficult. So.
It is apparently a little more complicated technically, so I believe he's left that as a future feature. But it is one that he's considering and likes as a feature, which I think is pretty cool. I thought a little while ago it would be neat if you could maybe make mention tags that would grab more than one person. So if I wanted to do a Radio Write-Off announcement post, I could maybe mention Radio Write-Off audience, and it would put a notification up for everybody who wanted that notification. I don't know. I haven't mentioned that to him yet, but I thought that would be cool.
I mean, it's something we can definitely do in Discord.
That's true. Well, we tried that with Jay's bot actually, and it didn't work. But
if
people
we want to
did
give people
seem
a role,
interested, so maybe we'll talk about that after the podcast or something.
Yeah. I suppose that means we are moving on to a very brief discussion of the prompt itself.
Mm-hmm.
So it's clearly been a good prompt. We've got, I think it's the most minifix we've had in quite a while now.
Yeah, 60.
And whether that's to do with the time of year or whether it's to do with the prompt itself, I'm not quite sure. It has been a pretty bad time of year for write-offs for the last few rounds.
Yeah,
obviously.
It's just, people are busy around holidays, so that's the way it goes.
Yeah. But it's good to have big numbers again in the write-offs, even though we're not back up to the hundreds. I miss the days of 100 minifix.
I don't know. I kind of regret that, honestly, Quill.
I regret nothing. Hashtag write-off joke.
Yes.
But yeah, the Twilight Zone is a really interesting prompt. I think using the name of a pop culture phenomenon as a prompt is... I mean, for me, I found it personally alienating, having never watched the Twilight Zone ever, and literally only knowing what it is from pop culture references, which has made reading stories this write-off particularly challenging for me.
Yeah, well, and I've absorbed enough of it through pop culture that I was even able to catch some of the ones that were obviously episodes, even though my entire exposure to the Twilight Zone is watching like half of the Twilight Zone movie sometime in college. Like that's the entirety of it. But yeah, no, it is interesting. Like we seem to have gotten a fair variety of stories too.
As I was saying in the chat just before we got into the podcast, I was particularly impressed by that because this prompt seems very restrictive. And it obviously isn't. Like, off the top of your head, you can think of 3 obvious ways you can take this that are completely different.
Yeah.
Which is, always a good thing with a prompt. But it just seems restricted. Just looking at it, I'm like, that does not look like a free prompt.
Well, it's interesting, because, like, there's the whole idea, like, restriction breeds creativity, right?
That's true.
Perhaps the idea that it seems restrictive but actually isn't means that people can grab an idea and then work well with it. Because although it feels like a restrictive prompt, there's actually a lot there, so they get the feeling of restriction to make them be creative, but then they also get a lot of ideas to be creative. I don't know, maybe not. It's just something that I thought of as you said that.
I'd quote that epigraph from XKCD, but I've forgotten. I used to know it by heart, the one about backwards alphabetization, but I have forgotten it.
I don't think I remember that one. You'll have to show me later. But
I will
now,
post it in chat after the the podcast. But yes, let's start talking about some stories.
That's
so this is of course the Prelims podcast. We wanted to talk about stories that we weren't entirely certain whether or not they'd make the finals, because obviously this is going to be, if they don't make the finals, this is going to be our only chance to talk about them. And if they do make the finals, the ones we're certain are going to make the finals are probably the ones we want to talk about then.
Yeah.
So this is our only chance to talk about those.
Well, and it's interesting to talk about stories that maybe have some things we could actually be helpful about, or give fresh perspectives on or something. Because oftentimes the ones that are like, everybody's really consensus about whether it's good in this way and bad in that way, it can be hard to discuss them because everything's already been said. Whether it's good or bad, it's already been said. So, yeah, I think the first one we were going to talk about was The Deep.
Yeah, and The Deep is interesting because I think looking at the responses to it, I think most people are certain it's going to make the finals. This has almost overwhelming love for it. So I think it's probably, after all that discussion about why we were picking the stories we were picking, it's a bit of a surprise that this is coming up. But I know I personally... I made notes on all the stories I've read so far this round, and my notes begin with the phrase, "I think I get why everyone loved this," which is, yeah. I don't know about you, but I found the emotions in this story a little too muted. And I know that's sort of half the point of it, and I know that's...
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because... muted emotions in the story doesn't necessarily mean that what's communicated to the reader should be muted.
True. I will give you that one. But at the same time, I think the language being muted and the emotions of the character being so muted kind of muted my own emotional response.
Okay.
I don't know. I mean, I enjoyed it and I loved the implications, but I didn't have a strong emotional response to them in the way that I think I could have. And it is worth noting that this story had a lot more words it could have worked with.
It's true. I mean, my take on this is that the writing here is exceedingly well done. Like, technically, the pacing is strong here too. It's got these italicized lines that break up the flow, but it has a fairly even progression as well, like italicized line, non-italicized line, italicized line, non-italicized line, but like the pacing works, the structure is strong in a lot of ways, but I don't know that it's got as strong of a narrative arc as it might. It just kind of fizzles out, in my opinion. Like that, especially the second to last line, seemed like a real... almost a stumbling block to me, because I feel like it ought to be a crunch line, right?
Yeah.
But it's got this like 7 zillion alphanumeric string at the beginning. Well, okay, not alpha, but like This is
Yeah,
probably supposed to mean something. This 43271021112T10. Yeah, like that's probably
yeah,
supposed
yeah.
to mean something. But I have no idea. Like, I could maybe figure it out if I stared at it long enough. But when I read it, I was like, um, what is this? Like, what's going on with that? There should be a lot of information there, but it's not. And then this kind of acronym thing. When I read that, I was like, well, that's cute, but it didn't like give me like the impact I feel like it should have. I guess I don't know. Maybe
It
that's
definitely
just me,
feels
but
like it should be a point that is a revelation of some kind.
mhm.
It feels like at that point in the structure there should be something revealed,
Yeah,
and a backronym is not going to cut it. It's not. It isn't a big revelation. It's not
sure.
something that's been built up to there. It's just, oh, Twilight made a weird acronym out of her name. Well done, her.
Yeah,
I
and
mean,
perhaps
yeah.
that's more of a structural problem than of a like actual storytelling problem. Like
Mm,
maybe it's the way these paragraphs are broken up. Like perhaps okay, so consider this. At the end of the paragraph, like 3 or 4 lines up, it says, "If so, she was a damned fool." That I think, if that was on its own line, and then like these last 3 lines were like all in one paragraph or whatnot, or like less, it might have hit a little stronger. I don't know. I
I
think this
think
thing does a lot of stuff well, but like you said, it is not perhaps um, hitting as hard as it could.
I don't know what everyone else got from it, because people have been in the comments, this is fantastic, I really got feels from this, but no one's actually really discussing where those feels are coming from.
Hmm.
So I don't know what other people got from this, but I do know that for me, I think that if so she was a damn fool line was probably the strongest line of the piece,
Mm-hmm.
regardless of whether it's on its own paragraph or not. I
Mm-hmm.
think it worked really well because, to me, my immediate implication was actually no, she wasn't.
Hmm.
I think the implication here is that this probe is very much making a mistake in its assumption
Hmm.
at
Interesting.
that. And yeah, actually, that's something. That's something I was considering bringing up.
Okay.
Um, it's an important difference. That's quite a significant time difference there. And it seems like clearly this particular bit of thinking is taking perhaps longer than the probe would normally spend to take on something.
Hmm. Maybe.
I mean,
Yeah.
it is about a 100% difference. It's a big difference.
It's true. Yeah. From the beginning, where it says 147 milliseconds to the end where it's 300 something milliseconds, that could be important, and it does have kind of that bookending structure that you like so much.
It does. I
Yes,
do
yeah.
love that a lot. Yeah, I think it's. I mean, it is worth pointing out. Like, yes, these times are short, and
Yeah.
I think that point is there to build characterization. A lot of, particularly the opening of this story, reminded me a lot. Was it
Hammerfall?
Horizon's story last round?
Yep, Hammerfall.
Yeah. Really reminded me of that sense of time moving, well, or rather calculations and thoughts happening so quickly that what seems to us to be tiny fractions of time are actually quite significant. That's the sense I got from it. So I don't think we should be focusing so much on how short these times are, so much as how different they are with relation to each other.
Could be. I actually didn't put a lot of weight on that. It seemed like just a stinger kicker on the end there to me. So I didn't put a whole lot of weight on it. Maybe if it is important, it might be worth emphasizing it more. I don't know. I think this
Perhaps.
does like it communicates like wistfulness to me, which is interesting. It's not like super heavily sad. Let's see, we get a comment here. The point for me is how often she has to go over these thoughts, Xeno says. That's actually a good point. If she's been out in space for like a bazillion years, this is probably definitely not the first time she's thought it.
Absolutely.
So, I don't know. It's an interesting story. We could go over the old not pony enough thing that's been brought up once or twice, but I don't know if that's...
I wouldn't call this not pony enough at all.
Yeah.
I think this fits very snugly into the realm of pony sci-fi, which
Okay.
is quite, at this point, is quite an established genre.
Sure.
and I think it does that quite well.
Okay. Sure. Yeah. Huh. Well, is there anything else you feel like saying about this?
I think that does cover most of what we wanted to say. Obviously, people are bringing up points in chat. There's a lot of things to discuss about all the stories. I don't think we're going to get a chance to say everything.
Yeah.
But if people do want to bring things up after the podcast, of course, we are going to pop back into talk. We can all yell at each other and have differing opinions, and it'll be great.
Wonderful. Oh, I do want to say this story was a good example of using numerals in text properly. Because it's using numerals instead of typing them out, and just about every time it did that, it seems like it was doing it right, which is good, because there is times when you do need to use numerals. So, yeah, good job on that, author.
Yeah. That was my quiet clapping. So moving on.
Yes.
Moving on, I think our next story was Reveries.
Yeah.
I'm going by the order of my tabs here. So Reveries, I remember reading this. I remember reading the comments on this particularly. And I remember seeing in a lot of the comments there were people saying this didn't quite work for us. Or, you know, things like that. They're not quite sure what happened or why it happened. Or rather, they could say, you know, this is what happened, but it just didn't quite work for me. That seemed to be the general impression I was getting from the comments.
Sure, yeah.
You commented on this one, didn't you?
I did, yeah. This is a third or fourth story I read, possibly.
Yeah, so I think for me, the main reason this didn't work, and I get to talk about films here because that's fun, it brings me back to an idea I was watching a video on YouTube a little while ago, actually, about M. Night Shyamalan, or however you pronounce it.
Okay.
Lama. Long name.
And
with a lot of
boom
similar...
shakalaka. Anyways.
Yeah, the one with a lot of similar syllables.
Yes. Yes.
I know, it was talking about his plot twists in particular, and it used 3 of his films as an example, and it contrasted them. And it was looking at the idea of a plot twist in film, and it was saying, okay, look, there are generally 3 kinds of plot twists. And they were really just distinctions in the kind of thing that the twist was about.
Okay.
But one of the it came up with a bunch of rules for how twists should be done to make them effective.
Sure.
And I thought they were very interesting. And one of them is things like the audience should come to the conclusion of the twist at the same time as the main character.
Right.
Or the characters in question. So it plot twists don't deal with dramatic irony. That's really important.
Okay.
But also, I think the word they used was tells. There should be tells in the film, so that not only can you not necessarily see the twist coming, but you know that it isn't just out of the blue completely. But when you go back and watch again, you should be able to see those clues.
I think I've said something like that in a previous podcast on how to deal with twists. It's like you need to do like the like optical illusion kind of thing, like the face and the vases, right? Like you show someone a picture and you're like, look, faces, and then when the plot twist comes along, you're like, oh, look, a vase, you know. And it's the idea that it's like there the whole time, but it doesn't make sense until you add one bit of information, which is, quote, the twist.
Yeah, and I remember you saying that, and I think that perfectly summarizes for me what was missing from this story, because it was very clearly, I think it was very clearly meant to be a kind of twist in a way that it was supposed to be. Like, obviously this first section you're not supposed to guess at all that this is what's going on.
Yes.
And then you're supposed to realize later on that the actual truth of the matter is this. Is that it is in fact just a potted plant dying and dreaming.
It was possible to realize it, but the reason it worked at all is because of proximity, which is a weird effect, and it's really hard to predict how proximity will work in writing. But because of the proximity here, I could reach the conclusion that this was intended to be the dreams of a potted plant. But that's all there was to it, Like, proximity is
Yeah.
the only thing that gave me that conclusion. And although proximity worked, and I think that conclusion is the right one, there's no actual, like, textual evidence for it besides proximity.
Yeah, well, the other interpretation is it's just one story that's completely unrelated sandwiched inside another one. um,
Exactly.
so, that not being a particularly uh, satisfactory answer, I think you have to come to the conclusion that it's
Yeah.
a potted plant dreaming. There's no
I
other
agree.
choice. But I, and so I agree with Xeno, this isn't particularly ambiguous in that sense because
Yeah.
there is no other option. But at the same
Right.
time, just because it's the only option doesn't mean it's necessarily blindingly obvious that it's the case. There's not. If you asked me to point at this story and say, find a quote that justifies this interpretation, it wouldn't be easy.
Yeah. Yeah, and that was my thought on it as well. It's that, like, this could be stronger. It's not that what they have here is bad. In fact, the central idea here is a very good one. It's a very dark idea, and it's laid out in a fairly effective way. But it's like, I don't know.
Yeah, I think
It's
because
not.
there's literally just one paragraph that hints
Yeah.
at it.
Yeah, it's not as
Looking at it now,
impactful as it could be.
one paragraph,
Oh.
and it's not a strong enough link between the two. That said, it is a phenomenal bit of writing.
It's quite good.
I'm not going to mince words here. I really liked the writing here. I enjoyed pretty much every sentence as just being pretty words in my face. And that's always a good thing, right? That is always a good thing.
Yeah, most of the time. We do disagree on this one a little, but yes, it was quite nice. I don't know. My other thought with it was, like, the fact that it seems to recontextualize, like, the entire show is perhaps a little bit strong. And I think I said this in my review. Everything you know is wrong is a bit of a hard sell. And that doesn't mean it can't be done or shouldn't be done. It's just something to keep in mind when all you've got supporting this twist is proximity. And it
I
works,
think it is,
but
in a way,
you've
it's the
kind of
perfect
got
response to the
matters
prompt.
of scale going on. I don't know.
If you think about it, it is kind of the perfect response to the prompt. And I think
Yeah.
I don't know whether being a great response to the prompt has actually weakened this piece or not for me.
I think
I
that's
think
too
it
hard to
has,
say.
but I'm not sure. But either way, it's a good response, and it's pretty well written.
Yeah,
So
it's very well written.
thumbs up from us, I think, is
Yeah.
where that's gone.
So, okay. So, unless you had anything else to say,
Yeah, I think that's all I had to say about that one.
okay.
Um,
So the third one we were going to look at was Snoopy versus Azathoth, which is an interesting idea. This did some unusual stuff, in that it actually used lines from, like, Apollo 10 radio transcripts, which was it? Yeah, Jordanus graciously pointed out in the comments, which, I mean, I didn't even realize the first time I read it. And after seeing that, I'm like, that's kind of cool.
yeah, it is. It's a pretty impressive thing to do.
Mhm.
And I think what's particularly interesting is up until that's been pointed out, a few people have talked about, sort of the way the dialogue has been
Right.
constructed. And I think it just goes to prove that, the way we talk, the way we have conversations in real life is nothing like the way people write dialogue. And that's important. That's actually a really important lesson to learn. When you
That's
write
true.
dialogue, you're playing this really fine balancing act between making it sound natural and making it sound totally fabricated.
Yeah. Like the word which I just said like 17 times, is
Good word.
something something that basically never shows up in actual written dialogue unless you're trying to specifically say something about the character. Usually that, like, they're silly and speak poorly and possibly a podcaster on a write-off. Anyways, something like that. Um, so yeah, but that is interesting. And I was thinking about this, like, because they use the actual dialogue transcripts. It's like, what could they do to make it seem more natural? What could they do to fit in around it? Like, I don't know exactly how you'd go about doing that. My first thought was like maybe to do some more like with the internal dialogue or something. But I don't know how well that would work. Um,
I think it is interesting to see what they've done with the dialogue and to think about what we might do if we were if all of us were trying to write something with actual real life dialogue. Like, I'd be really interested to see how a bunch of different authors took this exact same bit of dialogue and made totally different stories with it.
that might be fun.
That could be a really fun writing challenge, and I think it could be really interesting to see not only that, because these are just transcripts, right? Seeing how people choose to punctuate the dialogue, for example, is going to completely change the meaning in different ways.
Well, and I follow Sir Truffles on FimFiction, and he did blogs on writing for a while. And a couple of the ones he did, he compared some of his acting training and experience to writing. And one of the things he pointed out was that you can have multiple actors giving exactly the same lines, but having very different impressions by them. You know.
Oh yes.
And it's like not even so much about what they're saying. So there's a lot of variety possible with that, and it would be interesting to try, I think. I don't know. I think this is one of the neat things that happens in the minifix, though, is people are more experimental because it's so short, you know. So they try these weird things. I know there's 3 or 4 we were going to kind of comment on in the last section and kind of lump all together.
That's just sort of weird experimentally stuff that we wanted to comment on.
Yeah,
that's gonna be fun.
Didn't have like specific thoughts on, but yeah. So this one, I guess, kind of plays into that too, with the experimentalness of it. It is neat to see this sort of thing happen in the write-offs, especially because it's like, whoa, that's cool. The possibilities of experiments, even if they fail, it's fun to see people experiment.
And I think, to stay on the story itself for a minute, I think that the idea of, okay, so astronauts encountered Nightmare Moon on the moon, that's a cool enough idea on its own.
Yeah.
But to actually tie that in to the real world using actual real transcripts of actual conversations just really brings home just how that idea could work. And I think that I like the way it toys with that line between reality and fiction. In a lot of ways, this is the sort of tool that an ARG would employ. And I think that's amazing. I think that's really, really well done.
Yeah, and I mean, looking at my specific comment here, I talk about the pacing a bit. I talk about having 3 characters instead of 2, basically. You know, it's that sort of thing. It makes it tricky because you're working with an even more constraints than just the prompt. You know, if you decide to use external dialogue, but I think that it doesn't mean it couldn't be done, right? Like, part of my thing was I didn't realize John existed until like 2/3 of the way into the story, when they like actually started talking to him or something, and then I was like, what? John's a thing? So like it might have been possible to introduce the characters more strongly or differently or something, to like make that a little clear. And because you can do stuff in between the dialogue, you can work with the pacing that way too. Like you could have had all of the dialogue scrunched together and then a whole bunch of thought, right at the end, or something like that. So like you can mess with the pacing and with how things are introduced here more, and I think that might have been worth doing with this one because the pacing seems a little lumpy to me, and the characters don't seem solidly introduced. Exuno makes a point. I couldn't tell where the astronauts were. That confused me as well, actually, and it wasn't until I looked up the Apollo 10 mission that I had a better idea of what it was. It seems like the Apollo 10 mission, like, and this was just the impression I got from reading the Wikipedia article, so I may well be wrong, but it seems like the Apollo 10 mission had a moon lander that they launched that didn't land on the moon. It approached the moon but didn't land on the moon. Um, and one of the things the Wikipedia article said was you have to make absolutely sure you don't give these guys enough fuel to land on the moon and launch back off again, or they will absolutely try it. Which that was pretty silly. So it seems like they were actually in different parts of the ship, or maybe it was after the moon lander had been detached and they were actually in different parts of space. But they were in like different sections of the same ship here, some of them.
Oh, definitely, yeah. I think to me that came across, the idea that they're in different sections, just from the dialogue. I'm not sure it came across so well from the narration. I think there are a lot of things that didn't quite match between the narration and the dialogue. Like, don't get me wrong, I've sung praises of how the idea of matching up this narration with the dialogue is a great idea, but I am now going to critique the hell out of it.
Okay, fair enough.
I think if you're going to try something like that, you've got to make sure that the narration that you're writing to fit in around the dialogue works, and that the story you're telling makes sense with the dialogue that you've been given. Like, Exono points out in a review that Gene recovers from an encounter with an alien that might also be a higher power, and his first reaction is to say, "Boy, that sure is weird music." It doesn't quite work narratively, let's be perfectly honest. And I think, it's a fantastic idea, but you'd have to toy around with the pacing a bit more and toy around with where the different bits of dialogue fell to really sell it for me.
Yeah, I wonder if some of that came in because they picked, I need to use this amount of dialogue, and then they needed to like fill in around it enough, and they ended up feeling really squished for space. I know having 3 characters can do that unless you're really economical. I mean, my rule on, if I want to be absolutely sure my minific will fit within 750 words, I do 2 characters in 1 scene. And that's it.
Fair enough.
And I have done more than that, as I've become more confident and explored, economy of style and stuff like that. But just the fact that it has 3 characters in there might have been enough to make them feel cramped for space. Because if you use this dialogue, that's what you got to do. You got to have the 3 characters, which brings in more names and more descriptions and more spaces and all of that. Like it's in 750 words, it's non-trivial.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. That said, I don't think I'm ever going to get past the that line near the end. But VHF ranging was a hell of a lot better than telling people Apollo 10 had a traffic accident with God, and she looked like a Disney cartoon horse. That's a brilliant line. Okay, that
I actually
almost brings this back for me.
I actually wanted to write a reply to that, talking about how Disney's style at the time looks absolutely nothing like the sort of flash animation My Little Pony is modeled in. But I was like, that's probably not a worthwhile discussion to bring up.
In fairness, this is before Flash exists.
It's true. It's true. But
so yeah, is that everything we wanted to say about Snoopy versus Azathoth?
Oh, the lunar lander was actually named Snoopy. They had this whole Charles Schultz thing going on for Apollo 10.
Is that actually? Oh,
yep, that is actually.
Oh, I like
a thing.
that. I did not know that. That makes the title make an awful lot more sense.
Yeah, no, it really does. And when I saw that in the Wikipedia page, I was like, oh, okay. So that was pretty cool. I thought it was worth mentioning.
I'm glad you mentioned that. That's improved the story significantly for me.
Good.
All right. Shall we move on to our final quote-unquote story, which is, in fact, multiple stories.
Right. We're going to talk about the experimental stuff in the write-off a little more. So, Quackers, welcome to Equestria, and possibly yet hope in part.
Quite possibly, yes. Shall we get Quackers out of the way as quickly as possible?
People do seem to have done a lot of discussing it.
They have. I love Quackers to pieces. There we go, done. Right.
Okay, we're done.
No, in all seriousness, I think Quackers is adorable, obviously. But I think it won me over in lines 3 through 5.
Okay.
Those 3 lines won me over, and that was it. I was not going back on my decision. This is a great fanfic.
It's interesting. And I thought for a while about why this is actually effective, and I think what I decided was that it evokes an emotion very strongly. And I've talked about theme. I mean, I harp on it a lot in my reviews, and I'm probably half the time super annoying to people because they're like, Hat, you're not saying anything clear about what you want, and you just don't like anything. But like, I think theme is like something that the story as a whole attempts to evoke or deal with. And like this story as a whole, it evokes like the emotions that people have when they sit and listen to someone read a storybook with pictures in it, you know? And I think that's it's an effective and interesting way of doing that, and I thought that was pretty impressive. But it is gimmicky, so
Yeah.
make of that what you will.
I have 2 things to say very quickly. One of them is just to let everyone who is listening to the recording of this know that since we've started talking about this, the Writeoff Discord chat has been full of people spamming the word quack. And
Quack.
secondly, to point out, I really do agree with that point of it feels like someone reading a storybook to you. A lot of people have said in their commentary on this that this feels like a storybook. I don't think that's quite right. It feels like someone reading a storybook to you, and that's where those breakdowns of the little Unicode drawings come into play. They are effectively someone going, look at this bit of the drawing. Look at this bit of the drawing. It's a parent literally pointing out to their kid, look, here are the webbed feet, here are the 2 wings, here is the bill, and it quacks all the time, and it's adorable, and I love it, and I want to cuddle it until everyone's happy.
Okay. So, but yes, Quacker's a gimmick. It got a lot of discussion. It's an interesting gimmick, but it is interesting to see people experiment, and it's interesting to see them work. I'm kind of curious about how far this story will go. I don't think it will meddle, but I would be surprised if it doesn't make finals, because it seems to have gotten a fairly positive response. So
It really has.
maybe it'll meddle. Who knows? Sometimes just plain cute stuff is all it takes. So, but on to the next sort of gimmicky story. Welcome to Equestria.
Now, I admit I have not fully read Welcome to Equestria. I did not read every single one of those options in the form. I sort of skimmed over the titles and a couple of them from each, and I was like, yeah, all of these are in-jokes. This is fine.
But I guess
obviously one of them caught my eye.
the pink one.
Which is, yeah, you can't not see it, and that was lovely. That made me smile. I think it goes against sort of, the standard rule of don't use colours in writing.
Well, yeah, but rules are made to be broken, right? So
absolutely, absolutely,
absolutely, says the Joyce fan who is writing a romance fic in spreadsheets.
I actually made some progress on that one.
Excellent, good for you, Quill. I'm proud of you. So, but this kind of brings up, and along with Quackers, it kind of brings up like, what is a story? And this is something Horse Voice mentioned in his review, I think, in that, like, this is funny and it's interesting, but it doesn't necessarily make, quote, a story.
It is... It's an interesting question to ask, because a lot of the story of this piece is very much not explicit. It's very much between the lines. Like, it's obvious, but it's not actually written on the page. And I think that's... I wouldn't say that makes it not a story so much as I would say it makes it a very different medium to some of the other stories.
I don't know. His point, and I think I agree with him for the most part, was that there wasn't quite enough written between the lines. And I guess that's something each person would have to judge for themselves, but I don't know. It was interesting, and as an experiment, I think it was interesting and moderately successful. I had my own concerns about whether or not some of these were a little bit too harsh, but that's an audience thing, really, and some people like their humor really harsh, and some people don't. So that's the author's own call, I guess. But I don't know.
Is it worth noting
Hmm.
that at the very start of the story there is no Luna?
I did notice that. Yeah. So did fan of most everything. Luna does
Yeah.
not welcome and or
Interesting
hope for their
detail.
unending happiness.
It's an interesting detail.
So.
But yeah, no, I would argue that this is enough of a story.
Okay.
Just. This is a borderline case.
Okay.
But I think there's very much this. I think it's multiple stories is the ultimate way to look at this. This is clearly supposed to be like a cut and paste sort of, okay, you can stick many different stories in here, and in a way it's just a commentary on the human in Equestria.
Yeah, I mean, that's the way I took it, which is, I mean, interesting to read. You know, I've wondered for a while, like, just how far we could push the limits of what a story is in the write-off. And I'm like, if I submitted a essay to the write-off, would there be, like, a violent reaction to it? You know?
Well, speaking of that, one of my friends recently introduced me to creative essays, which is essays written as fiction. And
someone did
she'd
that.
Written an essay on Alice in Wonderland, but in the style of Alice in Wonderland and as a story set in Wonderland, which was pretty amazing.
Oh, it's kind of the opposite. Because someone did a story a while ago in one of the original minific rounds, which was reading as if it was like a thesis paper or something, but it was actually a story. But I don't know. Yeah, what is story? It's interesting to think about. It's interesting to see how people react too, because Horse Voice is really the only one who kind of brought that one up about it being quote story enough. You know, it's like how far will people let you push the lines in the write-off? I mean,
well, I will let you push the line as far as you like.
Thank you, Quill. Thank you very much. So,
but yeah, I think it is worth asking, does this count as a story? And at the same time, it's worth saying, well, actually, does that matter? It's
true.
An entertaining bit of writing.
Yeah.
It makes an interesting comment, and it very clearly falls into both the prompt and the genre of FiM stuff.
Do you remember what that was called, Gray? Or sorry, I totally interrupted you there.
No, it's okay. I was trailing off anyway.
Okay. Apparently Asimov wrote a technical paper about a fictitious substance and got it published.
I think...
Well, and the... Oh, sorry, go on.
Yeah, you go.
I was going to say, is it worth introducing yet, Hope in Part? I know you kind of said you didn't have enough to comment on about this one. If you want to leave it, I wouldn't be surprised if it made it into finals, although it might not. Poetry can get weird receptions.
All I want to say about Yet Hope in Part is the first stanza after the line break, I started squealing. I mean, I love structure to pieces, and I love structural gimmicks to pieces.
Yeah.
And this is effectively an entire poem that is bookend upon bookend upon bookend,
It's
effectively.
It's true.
Every line is a pair of bookends.
Yeah.
And that just sort of made me very happy.
Yeah, well, and maybe I was less impressed
it.
because I have actually seen this done before, and in a version that I thought was somewhat better. But, anyways. Yeah, so gimmicks. What is a story, and when should we use gimmicks, and things like that? Or have we said most of it already?
My opinion on gimmicks, as is probably well known,
Okay.
is use them all the goddamn time.
Wow, that's like
But
the
then
most
again-
emphatic I've ever heard you be, Quill.
But then also, my opinion is never do what I do if you want to be taken seriously as a writer. So maybe I'm not the person to be listened to on this count.
All right, fair enough. Okay, so, I mean, it is neat to see them, I guess. Like, if people ever stopped doing gimmicky experimental stuff in the write-off, I feel like we had lost something important. You know, even if I will never be surprised if they don't meddle. You know.
Oh yeah. But I do think in both of these cases, I think the gimmicks, they're very different gimmicks. Welcome to Equestria and Quackers.
Yeah.
Very different gimmicks, and they're used for completely different reasons.
Right.
And I think that because obviously Quackers uses illustrations to tell a frame story in a way. That's implied frame story of someone telling a story to someone else is entirely implied through those pictures, or almost entirely implied through those pictures. There's also a few asides that sort of fit in with that, but generally speaking, that's what that does, and I think that's great. Whereas for Welcome to Equestria, the whole gimmick is there to just, be the story.
Yeah, that's
the story
true.
is the gimmick.
Yeah.
Whereas in Quackers, the gimmick adds to the story. Dubs is being sacrilegious right now.
Dubs is being Dubs.
So I'm going to ignore him.
Yes, I'm dubious about what he was saying.
That was awful.
Was it?
That's making the final cut, but that was awful.
Was it as awful as Maelstrom last time we did this though?
No.
Okay.
But yeah, I think the gimmick in Welcome to Equestria is so fundamental to the story itself. Like, the story of Quackers is separate from its gimmick.
That's
the
true.
Gimmick is something extra. Whereas Welcome to Equestria does not exist without its gimmick. It is literally just a form on a page with like a 1-paragraph story at the end.
Yeah, I think
that's it.
I think that was part of Bad Horse's objection to it, was that perhaps there should be a little more to it than just the gimmick, which, I mean, I kind of agree with. It would perhaps be difficult to do, like how do you tell a story through a form like that? But, it is possibly worth thinking about as well.
Can confirm, telling stories through weird formats is not a good idea. Don't do as I do. Spreadsheets are killing me.
Okay.
So yeah, long story short, that's exciting,
Okay.
and that was interesting. But neither of us have any idea where it's going to come in the rankings, I suppose.
Yeah.
Which is why we're talking about it.
It's true. All right. Is there anything else we needed to cover? Let's see.
I think...
Did you have any personal favorites you wanted to mention?
I have 2 stories I wanted to mention very quickly.
Okay.
I think. Let me just double check my slate. Oh, I forgot that was at the top of my slate. So the first one I want to mention is Meaning of Being Dead.
Oh.
I know there's been some negative reactions to some parts of it.
Yeah, I was not a fan.
I noticed. But I don't know, that just really made me smile. I enjoyed it a lot. I know there were a few forced bits of dialogue, and some things weren't perfect. And I in my notes I've written there were some moments that felt a bit off tone. But I think it worked very well for me. The one recommendation I had for the author, I know they've used small caps for the commemorative plaque. I would advise using something else for that, and possibly going for small caps for Twilight's dialogue, just to sort of evoke that sense of death from Discworld.
Yeah,
because it's the same style of dialogue here. It's the same style of dialogue.
Okay, yeah, somewhat maybe.
But I don't know. That was just a thought that came to me while I was reading it. I was like, this feels a bit like the same way that should be done.
Okay.
But other than that, I really enjoyed this one.
Okay.
I liked the idea. I liked how small it was, if that makes sense. It's just one tiny conversation, but it implies a huge amount, and it has a huge amount of meaning.
I really did
packed
not
into a small
feel like
scene.
it did, but perhaps that's just my dissatisfaction with the points I drew from it.
Perhaps.
Because part of this sort of thing is, like, I feel like a story that has a good meaning to it is good, and when I read something about dealing with, like, death and whatnot, I'm like, well, there's a lot of potential here, and then it comes out, it's like, why don't you kill yourself? Well, I'm just enjoying life enough, and, like, that's what I got from it, and I was really disappointed, because it's like, that's not what I want to be told. It's not helpful. Anyways, maybe it's just me. Anything else that you thought was worth a mention?
The other one, the one that I was literally just now surprised to see at the top of my slate, was Trial by Fire.
Oh, that one was quite good, and I will probably end up talking about that one if we do a finals podcast too, because
yeah, I hope this makes
a lot of people really like that one. So
this was just smiles from halfway through to the end, and good writing from the beginning to the other halfway through.
It was nicely done. So I'll just say Discord Libs made me laugh like crazy, and it's got another gimmick in it, so you should take a look at that one.
I will take a look at that one.
It got kind of a mixed reception. Tyrant King Sonata Dusk is another one I really liked.
Yes.
That some people just did not like at all. But I thought it was...
I have my issues with it, but I enjoyed it.
So, alright.
I think that about wraps everything up.
I think so as well.
Well done us. We've actually recorded a writing
Yeah!
podcast. Yes!
We'll do at least one more before the year ends, maybe. We hope. So,
thank you very much, everyone, for listening. Thank you. It's been a blast.
Indeed it has. This is Radio Writeoff for the Twilight Zone, signing off.